Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Jeremy, founder of QuickMail.io.
And this is Amar with ZenMaid. And we should probably start varying up our intros at some point because I bet you that they all
That's
sound
good.
exactly the same. But
It's good.
it's because we're so damn good at it. That's why.
That's right. What do we talk about today then?
I think you put the question best before the call of I kind of saying that
How
because yeah.
how much do you let your personal life bleed into your company as a solo founder, right?
Yeah.
Or a founder.
Co-found.
Let's say
Yeah,
that.
as a founder, yeah. It's probably an even more complicated question when you have like multiple founders. But
True, actually.
yeah. Well, because it's funny is I don't consider myself a solo founder, but I essentially like because I took over the CEO role truly in like 2017 and my initial co-founder is no longer part of the company, essentially I am a solo founder like
That
at
could
this
be a
point. So
story
I
we could
think
talk
it's
about as well at some point.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be
So
happy to.
So yeah, so you mentioned a few things that are interesting. Maybe we could start with those ones. Like, what do you have in mind when you're thinking about like your personal life and how much it influenced maybe the company in a sense?
Well, so I think that the first thing that came to mind when you suggested this topic is that in a lot of ways, the company, like our companies exist to essentially like I guess supplement like our personal lives, right? And so in a lot of ways, like the way when I think about it, almost every decision that I make, it comes down to kind of personal preference and how is it going to impact like my personal life. I do think about the work that I do every day as part of like my personal life, right? Is that I'm not going to have like ZenMaid running campaigns that I'm going to hate doing, hate managing, hate creating all of that stuff, even if it's what's like best for the company, unless it was like kind of a life or death situation, I'm going to pick the things that I'd rather spend my time doing. And of course, like I have a margin of like discomfort or whatever that I'm like willing to go through. But I mean, really, when I think about it, I would say almost every decision, comes down to that, right? Like the number of meetings that we have at ZenMaid is not optimized for like the number of meetings that allows a company to like win the fastest or whatever, like they talk about in, I don't know, traction or in like scaling up or in like in
Yeah,
those, right? It's designed to have like personal and like work life balance. So yeah, that was kind of what came to mind. And then I also think it's important that I think we can talk about in a second because I want to hear what you have to think about this. But also, like I think a lot about the personal lives of my employees in a lot of things like as well. So yeah, I think that might be something to touch on in a little bit. But how do you think about this?
no, this is a fantastic discussion because I think there is a theory, what I think, and what actually happens. There's a lot of
Mm,
things that goes through my mind. Like one question you basically touched upon is like, are you happy to sacrifice the growth of your company for the comfort of your personal life? Because I think one of the things we have as a luxury, and I do think this is a massive luxury, is being the owner and the founder and the CEO, right? The
mm,
founder and the CEO, so the owner
yeah.
actually and the CEO, which means you can, based on your preference, and a lot of people do that, but based on their preference, favor one side over the other, which means I'm happy to get no money as long as I do what I want. That's
Yeah.
favoring
Mhm,
as long as the company just works and so on. Those
yeah.
are people who actually are more on the owner side, like they just want the return on investment and they don't
Mhm,
necessarily want the CEO side, or the other side, which would be um, 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 as long as I make shit ton of money, then I don't really care. I mean, you got those two elements. You got the CEO and the owner. The owner wants a return on his investment, which means the company
mhm,
keeps growing, and the CEO wants more like maybe the perk and the ability to steer the strategy and lead
mhm,
basically the team and so on. And you can just pick and choose. It's hard to make both really happy, I would say, because sometimes it requires decisions that are not necessarily in the best interest of the CEO. Like I give you an example. If, for example, if I was just the founder of QuickMail, would I keep myself as the CEO, right? If I can split myself, would I actually say, no,
mhm,
I'm sorry, I need to search a different CEO because I don't think Jeremy is good enough at this level for doing this type of task, right? And I
mhm,
will basically just I don't know if I would do it right now because I didn't do the
Yeah.
analysis, but that's the point. Like if I was looking at my founder role or my owner role, that's what I will be looking at. And so the
Mhm.
question I will ask you is if you had to replace Amar, the CEO, as the founder, the owner of ZenMade, would you actually want them to then put in the lifestyle into the company and then do it the way they want it? So that's why I think we have the luxury of having
Yeah, I
or
agree.
losing this oversight of the sort of like owner, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the role would be completely different if it was someone other than me.
Yeah,
If I hired a CEO, the company would definitely look
different. Yeah.
quite different, right?
And so
The only
that's my sort
exception
of, yeah, no, go ahead. What's the exception?
only exception would be if I hired the CEO internally. If I put Chris or Alex there, then
That's
I
a good
think
point.
most of the lifestyle stuff would very much consider. If I brought in an outside CEO, then I don't think that would be that's what would kind of be like maintained going forward.
Well, that's interesting because that's basically, I think that's going down to values. And so you know that Chris and other people in the company actually share your values. And so therefore
Mm,
you feel more confident to sort of like give them the role so that
mm,
that sort of culture will stay. But
mm,
if you look one step back and let's say you're buying ZenMate tomorrow,
mm.
right? And then you have to decide what direction ZenMate is going to go. But just as an owner, you're not stepping in CEO. Would you
Yeah,
actually necessarily promote someone from inside or would you promote someone from outside? It's not an answer you have to answer because it could also
yeah,
vary depending on each year, the goals for the company and stuff like that. But this is pretty
yeah,
much what I always try to put myself in. So that means that I'm seeing my role as a CEO not necessarily to serve me too much, but to serve the company. So for me, that's why it's always sort of like act in the best interest of the company. Which means if tomorrow I find a CEO that works better than me, and I'm convinced this person is going to take the company to the next level and we will do a great job, I will have zero problem in like stepping out because for me it's all about like a team. Like when you're watching your football match, do you actually care that the goal is going to take it like slowly this week because everything's whatever is in life or whatever is, it's like no, you have to perform your role to the maximum. And so that's
well,
why
see,
but
but
I give myself to the same
that's
sort of standard, and that's the point.
yeah, but that's a place where you're an optimizer, and we've talked about
That's
that.
right.
Is like
That's right.
I don't run a professional sports team, right? And I'm not
Mhm.
competing on the highest level of like business where it's like if you don't perform at your best every single week, then you may not get the $1 billion valuation or whatever. And I very specifically like decided that ahead of time that I would much rather grow at half the speed, but do it at kind of like an at our own pace where like we're challenged, but we're not stressed.
Yeah.
Right. And I would much rather like do that. So like I get where you're coming from with the sports team analogy, but like we're more like an amateur sports team than like a professional sports team, right?
Right.
And so like I think that's like the difference there. The other thing that I do think it's important, of course, like I won't touch on any like actual numbers here, but you as the owner of Quickmail would be completely financially secure if you hired like a CEO. For
Yes.
me, if I hired a CEO right now at my current salary as CEO, the amount that I pay myself as the owner of ZenMade would not be enough to cover my lifestyle here in London,
I
right? And I'm
understand.
probably maybe like a year or so like away from that.
Yeah.
And like in that time with the salary, I more than cover like my expenses here and everything. But I think that's also a very big point because I know that there's people out here that could run ZenMade better than me. And that if I was thinking about it just as the owner, I would have replaced myself like already. But I don't want to do that. And that's, a big part of this discussion, right? Is that I enjoy leading the team. I enjoy growing as a person, going to the next level at my own pace here as like the company gets bigger and and bigger. And so, yeah, I mean, that's why I thought it was such a great question,
It
is,
is.
yeah.
And I'm saying that, so that's one side that I'm saying. I sort of like do see my company on the side and I want it to succeed on its own type of thing, like irrespectively of my needs. And I think
Mhm.
that's what I'm saying. But on the other hand, I am conscious that some of my buyers and some of the way um, that I actually did pick some, I actually did do some decision that goes sort of like more toward what I wanted in life versus actually what the company needed necessarily. One of the good example to that is I had the choice between doing bootstrap or like, founded and then going to the $1 billion, valuation
Mhm.
or stuff like that. I very consciously decided not to go that, big companies, lots of people, and that sort of like $1 billion valuation, like lots of,
Yeah,
investment and stuff, because I didn't want this life, right? So
yeah,
it is one of the very clear conscious decisions that I made that have impacted the company based purely on my personal, decisions, right?
yeah.
That's a very telling example. Where do you smile?
I'm smiling because I think you're doing that right now with your hiring issues. Because you're like, I don't want to hire. And I think that's just
Yeah, I know.
personally, you don't want to go through that, but like from the
I have.
company
You're
perspective, you
right.
need to be doing it.
You're right, and that's why I'm for, and that's where the growth also comes from, right?
Yeah, yeah,
These are some skills I need to learn and I need to hone in order for the company to work. So
yeah.
clearly, I have the feeling sometimes that we are a company who could really compete, like like checking the sports team. I have the analogy. I have the feeling that we are a company that could really compete in sport in highly professional level. The problem is we are lacking a few people on the field, and so therefore it's really hard
Mhm.
to sort of like win all the time, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but the other point is that I'm not driven that much. Um, I'm more driven by freedom, which is kind of weird because I'm more driven by freedom than I am by money. Of course, it's easy to say that when you don't have any financial problems, right?
Yeah.
But it's always sort of have been like that anyway. But the point is that that
Well,
leads me to take decisions that are not necessarily in the best interest of the company, which is we
yeah,
still don't have a professional sales team. Honestly,
yeah,
that's what we should have for a very long time.
yeah.
And
But
I
I
may
think
not
that's
be the right
okay.
person to do that or to bring
Yeah.
that part of the
Yeah,
business.
exactly. But that's the whole thing, is that like I think this is where I think your optimizer kind of mindset comes in, is you're like, okay, like I'm creating a company and companies exist to make as much money as possible and to make their owners like as wealthy as possible. That's the point of a company.
But that's not
But
what
that's
drives
not
me. Yeah.
but that's not what drives you, and that's not like why you actually started the company. And so I think it's important to remember that it's your company, right? And my company is here to serve me, right? It's not here to serve anyone else, right? Now, granted, I do have to balance that there are, three other like shareholders in the business, and I do have to do my best like for them. I have like a fiduciary
Yeah, I don't have that.
responsibility,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so you don't have that, right? But the whole thing is, yeah, I mean, when I think about you over the past 7-8 years that we've known each other, I would say that you've optimized for freedom the entire time. What's interesting though is that so have I, and our paths were very different. That I was paying myself $1,000 like a month in the beginning, and I was like already hiring when we were making 10 times that amount, because that was what I saw would be my path to long-term freedom. Whereas for you, you just played to your strengths, built the tool,
Yeah.
started making like a
That's
ton
what
of
I like
money with
doing
like
at that
almost no
time.
exactly.
If
And
I
so
had really optimized for freedom, then I probably wouldn't be working on the company right now. I'll be doing something else, right? So I'm still working in the company. So I didn't, or even if I did
well
it, I did
well
it
but but
badly.
but but,
Let's
but
put it
freedom
clearly.
but freedom doesn't necessarily mean that you're not like working. It's just
That is
working on
right.
what
It's
you
freedom
want
of,
to, right?
exactly. You're
Yeah,
right.
I think
You're
that
right.
if at some point I think that you were like, you know what, I want to keep
I'd
making
be
this
coding
money,
all
but I don't
day,
want to keep doing this. Yeah,
I'd be
exactly.
coding all day if I had like the freedom to do anything I wanted on the company. In fact, I did it last week and it was like tremendously fun to finally,
Yeah.
code again, kind of thing.
I mean,
Um,
there's quite a few founders that have like become, like developers or just like regular people within the companies. They hire a
hey,
CEO, they still own a massive amount, and they just
that's
like
right.
do development work.
Jason Cohen, fantastic example.
Yeah.
Really great dude. I love the way he's thinking and so on. He's
Hmm.
just the CTO and he's just enjoying it. I think he
Yeah.
may even enjoy it not being the CTO and just being like a senior developer at his own
Senior developer.
company.
Yeah.
Which
Well,
which
who is
which
it
always
from
makes me laugh
from?
because it's the guy on the corner you can't touch or you can't say anything
Yeah.
because he basically owns the company. It's
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
fun when someone higher up in the company structure actually goes
I
down.
I
Anyway.
think it's Rand Fishkin, I think from Moz, that I
Mm.
think did that. That he was like, yeah, I'm just like a regular guy within this company. people come to me for like stuff, and I'm like, I don't know, like talk to the executive team, right? And he's just like completely, he just gets to work on
So
like
funny.
exactly what he wants to, and I've heard about that like a bit more from different people. So like it is possible, but I think at that point, if you kind of went back to that stage, I do think that you'd want to code, but I don't think you want a job as a developer. I don't think that's like there's a big
No,
difference between those two.
the big problem, and I think with, generally, and that may actually be a bit different topic, so we may have to steer me back to that topic. But I think the big, actually, no, it isn't. I mean, the big problem with people effectively going down the structure is they sort of like give a sense of entitlement or an impact on a culture. They have no idea how much it is. Like, for example, those founders will come at 11 at work and, like don't really care that much on a day-to-day. They just fancy of working on what they want. But a company can't function like that. Everyone is, it's like someone,
well, it depends on their role. If
right?
they're the founder, but they're not the CEO, then that could be just fine.
But no, because I think the role of the CEO is to make sure the company culture is, correct. Like the more people who are like fitting in the company culture, the better. And sometimes, and I've seen that happening, that's why I'm saying it, is that it's like you have your team, they know their plan on the football field, and then you have one guy just staying here and then, just moving a bit. And if you receive the ball, then it's fine. It just doesn't work, right? It's sort of like they operate in their own sort of like solar system. It's like a completely different system. And I think that's an example of like bringing your personal bubble at work. And I think to some extent it doesn't work. And that's probably why those people usually end up in R&D and stuff like that they have no obligation of results.
Wait, did they end up where?
R&D, like research and development, where they have no obligation of results.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
Because they basically, take themselves out of this sort of cadence of the company and so on, because they're they are the founder.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like I don't know. I think that when you're saying about the culture stuff, I think that's true. I think that there's lots of companies where the CEO doesn't actually determine the culture once you're above like a specific size, right? So to me, it's like if at some point ZenMaid had an office and I was coming in at 11 in the morning, to me it would be a question of, do I want to obligate myself to be here 2 hours early because of how it looks to other people? Or am I just paying them for their time and I'm going to show up when I'm going to show up? And like, but the whole thing is just recognizing that has an impact. Yes. I think the problem is people that show up at 11 and then think like, oh, like, what do you mean people think that I like don't work hard, or something like that. Right. And so, yeah, it's probably like all optics and stuff. But I do think that, yeah, if you get to like, I think that by the time you get to like maybe 30 or 50 people on your team, then I think the CEO actually becomes a lot less important. Like the main impact they have on culture is their impact on their like direct managers, right? Yes. And then the direct managers, of course, are going to dictate the culture to their teams and like and all that stuff. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting conversation for sure, because I know things would be very different if I was just the owner of ZenMaid and I was like giving myself as CEO kind of like orders or whatever, right? Well, just like in terms of like the amount of time that I spend working, like I don't know. In a lot of ways, I do feel like I actually am kind of doing my best for ZenMaid, but I don't know if it would look like that from the outside, right? Like I think that I would expect someone in my position to be in front of the computer, like doing more meetings with people, and like there'd be different expectations, right?
I know you have ZenMaid on your mind like constantly,
exactly.
Me too, right?
Doesn't look like it though.
But the funny thing is that I can't shake the feeling that I'm doing my best, but I know it's never enough. And that's not something I can shake off. And maybe that's my optimizer, side of things.
Yeah. I think that definitely is. But I think that I think a lot of people are like you, that Fran is very much like that, is like, yeah, right. She, I don't know if I told you, but for her project to get offset for like the tree planting, she just got the other day her very first like paying user of someone's donating like $25 or $50 a month now, who she doesn't know, right? Nice. So everyone else who is using it was through a network, right? Which is amazing. And then she puts out a tweet about it because I told her, I'm like, hey, start building in public, share about this. So and then she tweets about it. No. So someone saw the tweet and signed up. So now she has 2 people.
Nice.
Right. And I'm like, cool, like, let's go to dinner or whatever. And her response was essentially like, oh, like, that's cool. but like, you know, it's taken me 9 months and I only have two paying like
Oh,
customers or
that's
like paying
different. Yeah,
users,
okay,
right?
but I see what
Well,
you mean. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it's like the struggle to celebrate when it's very clear that like that we're winning and stuff. And
You're
so
right.
I've
You're right.
never had that problem like at all,
You
right?
are
Is I'm
celebrating even before getting your
yeah,
clients.
exactly. I'm just like, look, like I'm doing the work. I'm doing the work that I want to. I'm doing the amount of work that I want to. And wherever I am, I am. I'm confident in just kind of like where I'm going. And I could not care less that there's more that I can be doing, because there is never any point in my life where I have ever felt that I was doing the absolute most that I could, with the exception of like playing football back in the day, right? Like if I play FIFA, then it's like, you know, I will try to kill the other person and score as many goals as I possibly can. But like
Makes
outside
sense.
of that, you know, like in schoolwork, I've always been made to feel like, you know, it was never enough. And I hated that feeling.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's not that I hate it, because sometimes I feel like I'm enough, definitely
Yeah.
on what I do. But I think like I'd love, the company to be at that stage already. And so because it's not, then I probably wasn't the right person to bring it to this stage
Mm,
according to my expectations, right? Like we
gotcha.
should already have like a sales team. Like that's a given. Like we should have like 5 people already. And the fact that we are not there is a clear reflection on me that I wasn't having the skills to be able to do that. So anyway, that's keeping on pushing you. And by the way, you know the Michael Jordan on Netflix, the series? Have you seen this one?
Yeah, The Last Dance.
Yes, exactly. I so identified with everything. Like it's like, oh, I could have been working in basketball, and that's exactly who I would have been. It's
Mm,
just like
yeah, yeah.
this is the level of
It's
stuff that I'm
it,
trying to
it
execute.
it's funny actually. Yeah, I thought of you when I read, because I read his biography, his like really famous one, and then I also read Kobe Bryant's biography recently, and he had a similar, just like absolute like insane focus on basketball and on just being the best basketball player that he possibly could. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think that's for some people, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
I'm much more like, you know, the guy that managed to make a bunch of money but is sitting on the beach and everyone's like he doesn't work all like at all,
yeah.
right? Like I'm more like Shaquille O'Neal, right? Where it's just like he's huge
He's
and he's
just
just
good.
good at basketball,
That's
but he
it.
just doesn't seem to ever like work hard, right? Like that's kind of like
That's
the
so
goal that
funny.
I'm going for, right? Um,
But isn't that exactly a testimonial to what we said at the beginning, like how much your personal life is bleeding into
mm,
your business?
yeah,
Isn't that crazy? Which
yeah.
means to me, really means like, or highlight the fact, or make me realize how much important it is when you're hiring the next CEO that you actually align
Mhm,
with, his vision of the world, or life in general, right?
mhm.
More than just work.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about when you'd ask me about like what I would do about hiring internally or externally, because I think that would actually be the biggest question. That if I thought that like the culture was going to be the most important thing, and I wanted to make sure that like the current team like remains intact even if I step away from the day to day, then I would probably be promoting Chris up to CEO, right? That he's been CEO for a while, right? He's
Yeah.
working on the development team now. He understands the product. He's really got the high level like kind of understanding. If I was just going to be like, okay, I'm just going to step away as the owner and I'm going to try to find like a CEO that's going to be able to like double our revenue in the next like 2 years or something, then I think that I'd be looking for a very like different hire,
Different
and I
type.
would
Yes.
expect the
Because
culture
things
to
will have to
change quite a
change.
bit.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a very interesting question, but I feel like I should send this to Chris, because I think he'd be happy to hear that.
You need
Yeah.
to take it up a notch, Chris. Keep it up, man. Um, yeah, this is very interesting. I think for me, I I would probably look at what is the objectives first before deciding if it has to come from inside or outside. Because even if we get from outside, it will have to fit the culture. Like this is a given. Like I don't care. Like with our culture, I think we can bring it to a certain level. I don't think the
Mhm,
culture needs to change. It's more about like who can execute on this.
mhm,
Um, so I think it will go like that. Obviously, being in a company for a long time is a clear um, example of the culture is met. There is a fit in culture. When you take someone externally, there is always that risk.
Mhm.
Jason Cohen has an interesting thing about this, slight digression again, is
Mhm.
to basically hire someone as a CEO instead of hiring as a CEO, because if you fire the CEO, it's not as as bad on the morale, as impactful as actually firing a CEO. So you hire someone as CEO first, you sort of keep on handling over the responsibility, and when everything seems to be working fine, just say, well, by the way, that person's CEO, kind of thing.
Okay.
Which I find like was an interesting thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because for you it doesn't
Yeah.
work. You already have the CEO, but I don't.
Yeah. But what's funny is that it makes a lot more sense to me now of having him step into that CEO role. Like, I definitely think that I would probably give Chris a chance before like anyone else. But yeah, I would essentially do the same thing. That there's no way that I would do like a hot swap for me and someone new. Is I'd probably want them on the team. Like, I was thinking about that at some point last year, that like if I do want to phase myself out in the next 12 months, then I need to be looking for a CEO now, because I probably need 6 to 8 months with them like on the team and everything. And like I think I decided against that because the exec team is growing into their own right now. And I think that, now that I'm working with Heather, who's our CMO, now that I'm working to grow her into that role, and that she's kind of the last executive hire that I've needed to make. Now I'm kind of like, okay, I want to see where ZenMate is at in 6 months for 12 months, and then make a decision from there about who we're looking for as the CEO, right?
That makes sense.
So yeah,
maybe a different discussion how we actually move away, but another thing I was thinking of is, this is all lens or side of the view, but I've also worked like for 11 different companies, in the past, maybe 12, because some were undocumented. But the thing that I realize now, with some, having a step out on the other side as well, and then now having like view on the buff, is that I should have paid way more attention to the type of people who are actually running the business, rather than just purely the business, right? This is one of the telling thing. Like, instead of looking at the product they've been doing, look at how, what's the objective, or like what do people want in life, when that you're gonna work with, especially at the top, because you have some CEO and founders who bleed their personal life in the company like crazy, like madness. There are people who are like on the shiny object stuff, like 1 month is this priority, the next month is another one, because and then it keeps on like flipping things. That has it's like reckless driving on your company, right? It does have like a big impact on the company itself. And of course, if you're inside, it's not always what you're looking for, right?
Yeah, the only caveat that I would say there is that it's more about your direct boss than about like the founders. That's always been kind of like the like your boss has a bigger impact on like your job happiness and your development than what the company does, than the founders, than the product itself.
I
all
agree
of
on the
like that
happiness
stuff.
side.
Yeah.
I disagree because it's cascades, right? So, for example, Mark Zuckerberg didn't give a shit about privacy and stuff like that. It doesn't matter the size of his company; they still don't give a shit about privacy and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, but I don't really think. I mean, yeah, I think it's a factor. I don't think that you should be like picking out your next company based on like who the founder or who the CEO is,
No, that's
over
not
like
what I
what the
meant.
product.
But if
Okay.
it aligns with your view of life, then that actually works better. You have a better chance.
Yeah,
right?
that's true. But I feel like
if you
it's
like
one where
always
it's
new
like a
things and so
very.
on, don't find someone who likes peaceful and quiet in his life. You know what I mean? It's like,
Well, but to me, that's more about the boss than it is about the CEO. So I think when it comes to like the founder or the CEO, I think it's if there's very different opposing worldviews on like an extreme end. So like I don't think that anyone with a conscience could have gone and worked for like Yelp or for Uber while Travis Kalanick was there, or while Yelp was doing Yelp things, right? Because it's just they're just not pleasant companies to work for, and you can tell that from the top all the way like down, that the founders like seep into the culture. But in terms of like moving quickly or something like that, that has a lot more to do, like even in a company that where like the founder wants things to be more stable, depending on how big it is, your direct manager might still be like, okay, like, you know, I'm the marketing manager and we're going to run lots of marketing experiments, because that's a very different thing than like the guy at the top going, I just want us to focus on like one product. Right, you can still like be very creative within the product or within the marketing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's, you're talking to me that, you know, the person at the top has focus, like, you know, work on this product. Well, you know, in marketing, that may also be the focus, like, you know, find, you know, the best conversion, and so therefore you do multiple experiments.
Well,
so
but that's what I mean is that's what I mean, that you're like actually evaluating who you're working for directly, not the person at the top, right? That like if who you're working for directly is like, yeah, we're just going to do PPC and that's it, and you're like, okay, but I want to learn to do other types of marketing, then you know.
Do you think we can guess the type of company it is by looking at, you know, sort of you know, the life of the founder? Like, let's say the life of the founder is one guy who like bling bling, who goes like on big party, get some coke, get some prostitutes, whatever, like, you know, the big like stereotype guy of doing that. How do you think his company is run if he's also the CEO?
Well, if he's also the CEO,
his life is gonna bleed into the company.
We'll see, but to me, that's not the founder. No, but that to me, that's not the founder, right? That entire question was kind of misleading, because what you're actually asking is if the CEO is a drug-fueled addict, right? Not the owner or the founder, right?
All right, okay.
You know,
fair enough. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
But usually, in our size, on your stuff, like, you know, even like the Wolf of Wall Street, it was, I think, the founder and the CEO, right? So I guess that's when you're both like, it's, well, that's actually a fair point. It could actually be that the personal life bleeds much more easily if there is both, if there is the founder, the owner, and the CEO.
Yeah, agreed. Because I would say that like the entire company structure, the culture at ZenMaid is all very reflective of me and like my personal life and all that. And so like when you think about it, that's like the saying I know we've talked about before of, you know, when you're going from like 1 to 5 employees or like 1 to 10 employees, the CEO's strengths are the company's strengths. And then when you go from like 10 to 20 or 10 to 25, then the company or then the CEO's strengths become the company's weaknesses, usually because they're less systematized and everything has to be systematized like at that size, right? So, you know, and I think actually that's kind of what you're seeing, right? Is, you know, that now that you're getting bigger, now all of a sudden you're like, crap, we should have a sales team, right?
Yes.
You know, so
that's right. Hey, I wonder, like, you know, with the advent of AI, like, would we be able to have like an AI bot that actually is the CEO? Actually, you will have AI, you know, AI employees instead of the AI.
Yeah,
CEO,
AI employees. Right? Yeah, there was some dumb like Hacker News thread of like someone being like, oh, like CEOs don't actually do anything. Like everyone else is running the company. You could just have like a bot do this. And it was some like serious article that was talking about how like a CEO could dictate the strategy. Yeah, I'll see if I can find it. But I was actually quite proud of like the Hacker News community, because pretty much every comment was just like, this is unbelievably stupid. If you believe this, you've never been in a functioning like company. Like the CEO might not seem like they're working. Right? Yeah, exactly. But it just like every comment was just like, you're an idiot if you think you can do this.
Like as a developer, I had no idea what the freaking CEO was doing. Yeah. And for me, it was like, those guys don't do shit. You know, I'm the guy, you know, cutting and doing all the work. And now I'm on the other side. It's like, man, oh boy, was I
do everything. Yeah, exactly. It's like, God, devs, you have it so easy. I just tell you what to do and you go and do it. You know?
Exactly. But you see them actually working. But you're like, what are they actually fucking doing? You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Like the sales people are selling. Okay. The marketing people are marketing. Okay. The coder people are coding. Okay. What does a CEO fucking do?
Yeah, the CEO just does CEO things like photo shoots with like famous people or like whatever, you know, it's like they get all the credit, you know.
That's right. They go on, you know, live the high life. Like, no. It's interesting.
Yeah. Do you have time for another after this?
Yeah, let's just close this one. Say thanks to our 3 listeners and send us a tweet, something like that. Yeah.
Jay Chatelain on Twitter. It's just Amar. If you want to check out my wife's project, it's Get Offset with an underscore. Get underscore offset. Nice. Yes, plant trees, folks.
Sponsoring this episode.
This episode, perfect.
Right.